to go ahead and share my screen because I have been converted to the idea that it is okay to use some slides as long as slides are not the whole point of what we're doing throughout the whole session. And these slides have some general overview information and a bunch of resources and links, and they're already shared in the Slack channel. So feel free to download them and add some extra notes if you like, or whatever if you want. There's also over in the Slack channel a place to keep notes when we go to breakout sessions. So we'll be all ready to go. But just to get started then, some of what I was already sort of covering here is, we in CS, we're at this intersection between the customer and the company. And so when you think about it, with the subscription business model, with our role in trying to understand the business goals and objectives of our customers and match those against what our own business goals and objectives are for our company, like we are at that intersection. Like this is critical. So understanding business is understanding money and understanding financial data and metrics. And so this is definitely an area. I know that a lot of us have come from sort of connecting with, building relationships and that emotional connection and all of those things, but data and financials are critical for anyone in CS. So I want to be sure that everybody really feels comfortable and embraces what they do and don't know, because we are in a lifelong learning industry and a lifelong learning role. And so we should all feel comfortable with admitting what we do and don't know, what we do and don't feel comfortable with, and how to then take that next step to learn more. And there's always more to learn. If you look at, what kinds of changes we've had in our industry, and, from the growth period, and that's something that's just right here, I was going to say. So I actually started in tech, old timer that I am, Gen X, that I started with the dot-com era and the dot-com bust. And literally there was nothing that was even required in terms of any sort of business model back then. You would just put .com after your name and people would throw money at you, just throw it at you. Like there were no business models, and it was kind of hilarious. And so of course it was doomed, right? If there's no business model except for to add .com to your name, then your business is not going to make money and it's going to be doomed at some point. And it did, it all went bust. After that though, I forgot to finish writing the word growth. After that was the growth era, right? And so in that case, money was cheap. And so all they did was throw more humans at a problem, throw more sales and marketing at it. And then that's how you would grow exponentially, right? And everybody was expected to become a unicorn, right? They had to create new names. They called them centaurians, things like that. It was always grow, 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 grow. Then 2023 started to happen. Actually, it was sort of mid 2022 is when it really started to happen. And then all of a sudden, it's like, when are you going to break even? Tell us about your cash flow. Completely different. If what you were doing was spending money to grow and you didn't worry about what money you were spending because there was always cheap money to follow it, then all of a sudden it's, what's your break even? That sort of thing. So that is very different sensibility and questions that are coming from investors versus what was coming from investors before. And what investors care about, CEOs care about, CFOs care about, and then it impacts the rest of the company, and CS leaders should be caring about it too, right? And this is happening not just to your own company or maybe your former company if you were laid off, and this is why a lot of folks were laid off. It's also happening to your customers' companies, right? So this is why you want to think about this. You want to understand sort of macroeconomics in terms of what the environment that you're thinking about and what you're doing business in, but also then what specifically it means for your own CS program, for your own customers, for your own company. That's why then you want to think about of a CFO mindset. Who do you want to what are they thinking about for CFOs or investors? I already covered a little bit how investors went from being growth to the break-even point. They also think about the opportunity cost. If money is expensive, because now the way the interest rates have gone up, money is more expensive, then where are they putting their money? Is it going to make them money back? Investors usually don't expect to make money back for like 10 years. So if they're doing that, like, what could they be making their money on during that 10 years? What makes the most sense? That's part of what they're thinking about. They're also thinking about exit, not exit interviews like what we do as CS leaders, but their actual exit. When do I get my money out and get to go invest in something else or go and buy my yacht or whatever the investors are thinking about? But like, they're thinking about exiting your business because they are only involved financially, right? So they're thinking about their exit. When you think about the CFO mindset, they then are trying to take care of the company from a financial perspective. When you think about how, as a CS leader, you're taking care of the customers and you're representing the customer internally at the company, the CFO is thinking about how they need to optimize cash flow, that they need to save costs and generate revenue. They're literally thinking about that risk that the company is in financially, right? So they're always trying to think about how to eliminate risk. Lawyers also think about risk, but in a different way. They're thinking about liability. CFOs are thinking about risk, financial risk. So how does that work for you so far in terms of what I've brought up? Is there any sort of questions or thoughts from what I've already shared? Kimberly, great, you have your hand up. How can I help?
Yeah, this is really helpful. I've heard people mention when you're evaluating potential startups to work at to try to find out from them how much runway they have left. I
Yes.
kind of assume that means cash flow to pay their
Yeah.
bills, but I've never really was totally sure. So I just wanted to ask more clarity on that term.
Right. And so when you think about early stage startups, they get a certain amount of revenue that is, or that's invested in them, like when they do a Series A fundraise or a Series B fundraise, things like that, right? So let's say they get $10 million for their Series A. That's just easy because it's 10. And maybe they spent, 4 million of that in that first year by hiring people, by getting that pizza oven for the kitchen, the ping pong table, the beer keg every week, whatever it might have been, in the past or, currently. They let everybody buy a new desk because now they're remote, so as soon as you start, you get to buy a new desk, you get a new computer, all these things, all these expenditures, right? So they spent 5 million. So now they're down to 5 million, 5 million left. That is their runway. If now they've hired a bunch of people that are all getting paid $500,000 annually, then, you think about how quickly are they going to run out of money? If they're all, if they also are paying, that's another reason why they might look at how much they're paying for all of the platforms. If you get charged, $10,000, $40,000, $100,000, I'm just making things up here, but certainly there's some platforms out there like Salesforce or something that might cost, a lot of money each month. Like, all of that adds up. Think about all the productivity tools, all the platforms. What does it cost monthly? What does it cost annually? All of that eats into the revenue. So how much runway do you have based upon everybody that you're paying to work for you, based upon all of the expenditures that you may have? You're paying for internet, you're paying for, like Snowflake or various databases, all of that. What is your runway? If no one else, and it's not just that in terms of runway, if no one else invested another penny, do you have enough customers that are adding to the income versus what you're spending? And then that's what we get into the break-even point. For all of your expenses as a company versus the revenue you have coming in, how many customers do you need versus what are your expenses to be able to break even? So there's runway and then there's break even. And it's so excited. There's actually some great resources I'll just share with you. There's this great video and it's called, "Is Your Company Default Live or Default Dead?" And that's exactly what it speaks to, is exactly that point in terms of your revenue and your expenses, and also then like what runway you have in terms of your investments. And if the default, so if you, when you run out of investment money, and you take a look at how much revenue you bring in versus how much money you spend, you're either what they call default live or you're default dead. If you can't pay your own bills with the revenue from your customers, then that would make you default dead. That said, I'd still, even though I gave you the definition of it, I'd still say watch the video. It's super cool. Okay, so also, I just thought I'd share with you then some different ways you might be thinking about financial responsibility as a CS leader versus a CSM. So like there's post-sales revenue contribution. The first thing that I did when I came in to a role that I had about a year ago was I took a look at how much revenue sales was generating up until when they sign on the dotted line versus what CS was responsible for post-sales, right? And basically what I shared with the CEO is I said, oh, it looks like back of the envelope, about 91% of the company revenue is post-sales. It's the responsibility of CS. And he starts arguing with me and he says, no, because I think, in the first year, it actually moves over to CS, more quickly. And, I think, when you look at it, it's probably closer to 97%. And I was like, oh, okay. So somewhere back of the envelope between 91 and 97% of your revenue, your company revenue, is the responsibility of 2 CSMs for your 200 customers. And then he said, oh, right? Because if you take a look, he had like 6, 7 different, AEs, 6, 7 different, SDRs. He had this whole marketing team that was focused on pre-sale. The product marketing person was focused on pre-sale. Everybody was focused on pre-sale. Product was focused on pre-sale. Everyone. No one was focused on post-sale. And that's where somewhere between 91 and 97% of the company revenue was the responsibility of literally the 2 people in the company, 2, for the 200 customers. Okay. So when you show somebody that all of a sudden turns their head and they say, oh, maybe I should be thinking about CS. And that's kind of what happened when you start to look at 2023 as well. All of a sudden they're going, oh, wait a minute. If we don't have all of these customers walking in the door, what are we doing with expansion and retention? Oh, now maybe I care about this, right? So then that's a way that you can start to, but if I hadn't done that exercise and if I hadn't shared that with them, then how would they have known to even look at that, right? Anyway, so then you want to understand what is your margin contribution? So how much are you spending on CS versus what is that revenue contribution? And in this case, the margin was amazing because they were only paying for 2 CSMs and they were responsible for somewhere between 91 and 97% of the company revenue, right? So the margin was really big in terms of CS margin, right? When you're looking at cost versus the cost of supporting post-sales. It wasn't necessarily good that it was such a big margin, but they certainly had room to expand on that. And then some other things you can think about are like the break-even point that we were talking about, how you do revenue projections, as opposed to somebody saying, oh, well, now that we're spending so much money, we just need you to make more money post-sales. It's like, maybe that's doable, maybe that isn't, right? So you want to think about how you might do revenue projections, how you might increase your efficiency or save costs. And then also if you have a CS program roadmap, then you know what you're doing. You can direct, this is how we're going to get there. This is how we're going to meet our customer needs versus our company needs, right? As opposed to it being imposed upon you. And then you also have for a CSM, when you're thinking about as a CSM, you have a book of business. Do you know who your top or bottom ARR accounts are? What sort of margin does that represent in terms of the cost to produce that? And that might be of your of your biggest ARR account, are they also using a lot of resources or not? You can think about that. The likelihood and value of your accounts and that churn risk, and how you might be aware of what sort of churn risk your accounts have versus your projections of expansion and your retention of revenue. Excuse me, that's too many R's all in row. But does that make sense? The difference in terms of how you would focus your scope as a CSM versus how you think about as a CS leader for your overall program. Any thoughts or questions? Because I'm getting ready to send you out into breakout rooms. You can also talk about it in your breakout room, but is there anything else you want to like, Jan, what the heck do you mean by that? This is the time to say it. Or someone wants to say, Jan, you haven't even raised this, and every CS leader knows you should talk about X. Sandy, I see you came you came out from under. Yep, there we go. You're off.
No, I just think it's a really great overview. I think each one of these topics could actually go in
another session.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. You have your topics for the rest of the year. But I think as an overview, it's great. I think depends on what the CSM is needing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's what they should explore. And that's why I like your list of resources. I think that's great for people to refer back to.
Yeah, no, and this is meant to be sort of an overview. There's so many different directions you can go, and so many different things that, depending upon what you're already familiar with or where you want to get started. And it could be that you're not even sure, there's also terms like rule of 40, or how rule of 40 might have changed for 2023 and things like that. Like, what the heck is that? I have a link for that. You can read about it later. You could also make that a whole session too, right? But today I'm just providing an overview. And so what I'll do, the questions. Yeah.
Sorry, Jan, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just gonna say, I want to offer a suggestion. If you are struggling is probably too strong, but if you're curious about any one of these topics, leverage this community.
Yes.
Help for the one-on-one. Go use the donut.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your topic of discussion, because I think each one of us will actually bring a different perspective.
Yes.
So, but definitely, take Jan's knowledge and then use this community to help each other.
Absolutely, Sandy. That's a great suggestion. The donut is more for the mock interviews, but that's a great idea. Maybe we should add another donut, or certainly we have a what is question where you can ask questions about things. But anyway, what do we have here for questions? How comfortable do you feel discussing financial data and metrics? How are you using financial data and metrics in your strategy now? And whether it's your book of business or CS program, and what is the next thing you want to learn about to better understand financial data or metrics? So those are your questions. It's okay to say, I get this, but I don't get that, or I'm just getting started. Where should I start? This is an opportunity for you to discuss. So let me see. I'm gonna put you into groups of 3 or 4. So you have some time, and we're just gonna go away about 15 minutes. So I'm not sure how many groups this is now. All right, I think I'm doing 10 groups. Okay, off you go, and feel free to ask me questions if you need to come back out here, and I'll pop you back in, okay? I'm glad that everyone did. The CS office hours, I'm just gonna put that link. This is how you can stay up on all the topics that we're doing each week and that kind of stuff. It's the only way I can keep up on it. What are we doing next week? Oh, Lane Holt from Gainsight is going to be here. We're going to be talking about customer advocacy at scale. See, so
I'm so glad you connected with her, Jan.
Yes, thank you, Sandy. I'm so glad that you connected us. Okay, so that's the LinkedIn groups. Someone else is going to put the Slack channel link back in the chat. Make certain you get over to the Slack channel, and that's where you find all the notes from this session. So tell me about this. You just went off and you had some.
You're muted.
Yeah, you went on mute.
I muted myself.
No, I muted you by accident. Sorry,
Oh,
Jan.
you muted me.
I'm
Oh,
trying
well.
to mute everyone else. Sorry.
No worries. That's all right. So what felt so awesome about this? Everyone loves numbers. Is that it? No. Tell me.
No.
Someone come back and share what felt good. Pam, or you're off mute? Was that?
Yes, shocking. I'm going to talk. Terrible computer is probably not going to work. So I think that one, we needed, right? You know, we just need to be smarter. We need to be able to, if people are looking to, you know, we to show it, oh, we're bringing in money. Here's something that we discussed, and that is that a lot of times we don't have access to that numbers. So we need to be able to have the conversation. How do we let people know that we need those numbers?
Hey, Pam, it's really hard to hear you. Just letting you know you're kind of garbled.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if we can move. I think we got the gist of it.
Yeah. I just to repeat for other folks, what Pam was really calling attention to is that a lot of times CS leaders don't necessarily have quick and easy access to the data, whether it's financial data or any data. And that's a real issue, right? One of the first things I did when I was, you know, that interim leader, when I was talking about coming up with, you know, how much revenue does CS have responsibility for, as sort of my first step to show them, hey, this is important. I made friends with the business affairs guy, the business ops guy, and he knew where all the bodies were buried. He knew how to get all the data. And, you know, I was, you know, he was awesome. And I told him that lots and lots of times, right? Like, if someone's helping you, be sure to build up their ego, tell them how thankful you are. And, you know, they get to learn. That's the other thing too. He got to learn so much by digging into this data. He was looking at it a new way. So they often are appreciative even that they get to look at some of these questions, you know. So don't think that you can't ask for help just because you don't have access to the data. Ashna, you're off mute. I'm going to call on you now. You didn't mean it.
I didn't mean to, but I think, you know, I think I was piggyback on what you just said. And I think it was also Pam is typing in the chat, and I was looking through that too. Mm-hmm. In our group, we talked a little bit about that too, especially Joseph, sorry, I'm calling out on you. But he mentioned the same thing. It's like he doesn't have, you know, like you don't have the data. And but then Dan, and also in our group, is also called out. It's like how he's coaching his team as he's leading right now, to giving them that, you know, just an idea about, you know, what sort of, you know, financial data that you should know about, even as a CSM. So going back to, you know, what Pam was saying, and even in the chat here, is giving them access. And I think that's the most, as a leader too, that's what I can tell them, that even on through my one-on-ones, or even through my meetings that I have with my CSMs today, I am showing them, here's what I'm looking at, as even if it's just a report, or here's where the data is coming from, here's what the executive team is looking at, and, you know, giving them that understanding and access around the financial data so that they can also pull up a report, whether it's in CRM or in Excel or whatever, and can find out and get comfortable around the data. I mean, I think that's the least that we can do if you're managing a team.
Well, and oftentimes too, if you tell, you know, if it's a startup and you might be more on first name basis with a CEO, or generally, you know how to reach out to them. If it's a, you know, big enterprise company, maybe not so much, but there's somebody else you can talk to who's maybe more inclined to help. But if you tell somebody, hey, I want to manage my book of business in a more strategic way, I don't know who my top 5 ARR customers are. I don't know who my bottom 5 are. You know, like, how can I be strategic if I don't have the data? If you raise your hand and call attention to that because you don't have that data, they will want to help you. they will absolutely want to help get that data. And you're probably not the only one. Or if you are, then, talk to your CS manager or CS leader about it, and they can help you get that data, right? They can say, oh, when we onboarded you, I guess we didn't show you that really important information. Like they will not want to keep it that way for long either. What other thoughts
Hey,
came up?
Jan.
Yeah.
So we had a really good discussion group as well. So thank you.
Yeah, good.
I think, I was telling them I've been in this industry now for like 13 years. And when I started, it really was not shared with me, even like, what is our ARR?
Wow.
And we had someone in our group who's trying to get into the industry, and also all of those definitions were new. So I think you said it, and I do think we have to start at the very top. Like, what is the ARR? How does that compare to other companies, and where are we? I was telling them just in the last couple of years, I went to a new company, and NRR, the CCO and myself as a leader were defining it differently as net recurring revenue or net revenue retention. And then we had a member of our group who said, hey, even when you have net revenue retention, different people include different, is there a duration of the contract or a revenue perspective? And so I think at the very basics of everything is creating the definitions and ensuring that people understand them. And then by looking at forecasting and getting those numbers, and you start to incorporate it into your overall conversations, then it starts to become a part of the cultural DNA.
Yep. And people will try and create, the metrics in a way that's more favorable to them sometimes, right? And you got to call that out sometimes and say, no, you can't just exclude a whole group of accounts from churn because you have a rationale for why they don't count. They still count. They churned, right? Like I've seen literally a company that had 25% churn try to claim they only had 10% churn. And it's like, no. There's they have to count that other. The other thing is too, on the resources here, that one of the resources I point out is the SaaS CFO, and I have a link for that. Now, granted, this is someone who was a CFO at SaaS companies, and so he's writing for CFOs and CEOs. And sometimes I don't love the way he's defining things for customer success because he thinks of us as cogs. So I'll explain all of that in a second, but you can get a lot of information, a lot of metric information, things like that from the SaaS CFO. Now, before I move on to you, Felicia, unless you were asking me, what the heck do you mean by cogs? And I do have a cogs definition for a LinkedIn post and blog post. Cost of goods sold is what COGS stands for. Many SaaS companies are actually cost of services sold. But you have basically sort of what you have is cost against revenue. And so they'll think of marketing and sales as revenue generators. So they'll calculate what that margin is differently than everything else, which they think of as services sold or goods sold. And all of that is expense, right? So if you are on the side of COGS, instead of revenue cost, then all they're ever going to do is say your team needs to get smaller. You need to be more efficient. We can't afford you, right? But in fact, you're trying to generate revenue, right? So if you don't explain to them that you actually belong against the revenue side, then you need to have, that's why another reason why it's so important to understand all these terms and understand all of this so you can help to make the case. And that's why it's so important for us to be revenue leaders, is to understand how to speak in those terms and to make the case that we generate revenue, right? Otherwise they will continue, it doesn't mean you can always throw bodies at it and be super expensive, but anyway. Oh, good. Excellent. Lynn, what's this that you just shared in the chat?
Oh, so it was actually exactly that. So as mentioning, like, should customer success live within COGS or sales and marketing? And so it's like, if it's considered more of that, you are supporting the day-to-day operations, then it really is more of that cost of goods sold. Whereas if you are strategic, if you're managing renewals, expansions, then how does that fall more into like the sales and marketing side? It's actually part of a conversation we were having around just customer success overall. And I know it's always an overall topic of customer success of how do you get people out of the day-to-day support and how do you get them into being strategic? I had never heard like the COGS argument of it before and how it's actually impacting margins of a business. So yeah, it was an interesting conversation from another topic that is also, I think, very fitting to the financial conversation here.
Well, and the margin is what investors care about, right? And so they'll ask, you know, like, what is the acquisition cost and things like that, you know, CAC. That's why I also have a link to CAC there, because they ask that quite a bit. But you also want to take a look at what your margin is, you know, to when you're bringing in the revenue against the margin, but then also, yeah, exactly that. Are you going to click? And that's another reason why I wrote that post where I was so angry when someone tried to call us the happiness department and that we should only be trusted advisors and we should never sell. And I was like, stop. Our whole business model falls apart if we're not focused on how to bring revenue to our company and bring revenue to our customers, right? Anyway, so thanks, David. I appreciate it. I was really angry that day though. But great. Thanks so much, Lynn. I will see if I can add that into the slides too. I'll get that later and add it into the slides. What other things came up when you did your breakout?
Didn't Felicia have her hand raised? I want to make sure.
Oh yeah,
that...
Felicia, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You're keeping me honest.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I love this topic because we actually were spending a whole week in Austin as a team with renewals discussing, you know, these high level topics like, and of course, at the ed tech company where I work, they're kind of moving where renewals is becoming more and more part of CS and our motions are, you know, more aligned, let's say that, right? But we are focused on expansions more and, you know, looking for the value. But I feel like that talk about the NRR, the GRR, you know, and ARR, like really it's about, you know, how's this affecting my success personally? How are you measuring my success against, you know, knowing the ARR? I know my ARR in my book of business, and I know how that switches out with changes in the segmentation, but understanding the NRR and the GRR and how that's where I can actually have an impact, you know, and if I can't have the customer, if I can't retain that customer, or I can't get that customer to expand, then that number is going to change. And those are the things that I'm focused on. So my activities and my productivity is solely related to, you know, retaining those customers or expanding those customers or selling them something, you know, getting them to do something else, upsell. So that's how I see those numbers.
Absolutely. And just in case all these names that we're throwing out,
yeah, acronyms.
Like what do they mean, the acronyms? So ARR, annual recurring revenue. There are some folks who focus more on monthly recurring revenue, but ARR is annual recurring revenue. Then you look at sort of like GRR. GRR is just looking at your retention. It's not looking at what expansion revenue you have. And then NRR, you're adding in the expansion revenue against all of that. So there's gross retention rate, and then, or gross revenue rate. Anyway, it's GRR. And then there's NRR is net retention rate. So thank you. Gross revenue retention. Thank you, Fran. Anyway, and that's the problem is sometimes you just keep saying these acronyms over and over, and then you forget what they even stand for. And it's really important to think about what they stand for. What are they telling you? Because given that your retention, you know, just focusing on retention is figured into NRR. But sometimes what NRR does is it masks over if you have a lot of expansion revenue, it'll mask over the fact that you're losing customers that's a big problem, because if it costs the cost of customer acquisition cost, right? CAC, if that's the most expensive thing you do with a customer is bring them in, right? And when somebody leaves, that means the CLT, customer lifetime value. Oh, my cat, I don't know if you can hear her, but anyway, she's upset about it too. The customer lifetime value, if they're leaving, that means all of that potential revenue you could have kept or grown with that customer is gone. And the only way to replace it is to go and spend more money on bringing somebody in. Right. So all of these kinds of things. So then if they say, oh, just go and expand, we want you to expand double next month. Like that's what we need as a company. We're not bringing in the new customers. So now you have to do 2x of what you used to do. That doesn't necessarily work though, right? Because what do you need to do in order to get them to expand? Well, maybe they need to adopt the product. Maybe they haven't adopted the product, right? And if they haven't, that's a whole set of activities and you can't snap your finger. The post-sales motion isn't, just go and talk to more people, which is what you can do on the pre-sales motion. And so part of what you need to do, and that's why I have in there that part of what you need to have is a CS program roadmap, is because you need to be instructive to your company and say, hey, this is what we can do. This is what we still need to do, right? There might be things you need to fix in your adoption or customer education or in your customer marketing or in onboarding. There's so many different parts to building up that expansion and retention, right? So if you can speak not only in the terms of CS and those terms, but relate them to the financial terms, and what they want to hear is financial, then they start to say, oh, okay, so maybe we do need to focus more on that onboarding motion. And that's how that's connected. You do that then through maybe some of your exit interviews as your customers are leaving, right? So trying to bring it all together here for us. Any other thoughts or closing words on this big, big topic?
I'll jump in.
Okay, great.
Here again. I mean, I think I'm just gonna wrap it up by saying that we need to talk more about this. As in, I'm just saying in general, we don't talk enough about this financial topic, just in general in customer success, I would say, and we need to. I think trying to separate customer, I guess, going back to some of the topics that you discussed before, Jan, it's making customer success, and it's not, it's not sales, or it's not related to data or whatever, but it's like how you said, it is, we are a revenue building function. And I think we need to, as a group, as a community, we need to talk more about this. That's what I would say.
Be unafraid of talking about it.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yep. Thank you. That's the right way to say it.
And I know Lynn is here tonight, and we're going to talk about too what it's like to be like the first CS leader in a startup. We're going to talk about that, I think, either in April or May. And that's the other thing too that can be really challenging, right? Like you have all of this revenue responsibility that you need to bring into a small company that has nothing built yet, right? And at the end of this month too, we're going to talk about roadmaps, building a CS roadmap, because that's also part of it, right? When if you're building out your CS program, where do you start first? What's going to be most impactful? How do you get to this place where then you can impact revenue, right? So there is a big picture to it, but then how do you break it down and build all these small parts that sort of get to this? So anyway, hopefully these resources will be helpful. I hope that you had a chance to meet up with folks. Don't forget, join the LinkedIn group so that you can see what's coming up. Join the Slack group so you can talk to each other in between. Connect with each other on LinkedIn. Just anyway, I'm so glad that we all were able to get together tonight. So thank you. Thanks for showing up.
Thanks, Jan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of SuccessHour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.